All right, looks like we're good to go. Um, just get this set up here. All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. Today, we're going to be doing a webinar on the Science and Technology Business Startup Grant offered through the Technology and Innovation Office for the New Mexico Economic Development Department. My name is Michael Prosnitz. I'm a Senior Economic Development Coordinator with the Technology and Innovation Office, and I'm also joined by my Associate Director, Lindsay Humphreys. All right, let me get prepared properly. All right, Lindsay, can I just get confirmation everything looks good? You seeing that? Cool, perfect.
Looks good.
Okay. So for kind of the agenda for today, I'm going to do a quick presentation on a kind of high general overview of everything to know about the grant. For more information and more detailed information, please make sure to look at the grant manual that's on our website. Everything will be in more depth there. So that'll take about 10 or 15 minutes. And then afterwards, we'll leave the rest of the time for questions. But we will do questions after the presentation. So if you do have any questions that come up, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand during the presentation, and we'll get to them after in the order that we receive them. You will be able to unmute and turn your cameras on, I believe, or maybe not. But it looks like I forgot to do that setting. But I can allow your camera and mic. So if you do raise your hand, then I can go ahead and allow you to speak. Sorry for not getting that done in advance. All right. So let's just get into it. Like I said before, we're here to talk about the Science and Technology Business Startup Grant. So the goal of this grant is to assist early stage technology companies with commercializing their technologies and continuing to do business in the state of New Mexico. The grant funds are intended to be used for business development and commercialization expenses, and we'll go into detail on what exactly that means in later in the presentation. And as a reminder, our office has 4 priority sectors, those being aerospace, biosciences, advanced computing, and advanced energy. So going over eligibility first, the first requirement is that a company needs to be headquartered in New Mexico, as well as having 60% of their payroll located in New Mexico. It needs to be a for-profit science and technology company. You need to be in good standing with the state of New Mexico. And as a part of that, you'll need to submit a letter of good standing through the Taxation and Revenue Department with the state in the application. You need to be in one of our priority sectors, which I just mentioned: aerospace, biosciences, advanced computing, and advanced energy. And then as far as past awardees, if you were awarded in a previous year, there is essentially a gap year in which you're eligible to apply. So you can reapply every 2 years from when you were awarded funds in a previous year. The award range is from $25,000 to $50,000. And just as an example, we had 7 awardees in fiscal year 25. We are planning to make more awards this year, but I cannot give exact details in this webinar. So getting into the funding use a little bit, we're going to start with the ineligible funding use at the bottom. This hasn't changed from previous years. The ineligible funding uses are payroll, research and development, materials and supplies over $100, laboratory or business equipment, and then alcohol, food, drugs, etc. So those are essentially the 5 things that you can't spend the funding on. And then the eligible funding uses above are just kind of what we see most often and what people use the funds for generally. So examples are intellectual property assessment, patent filing, outside lab testing and validation, regulatory assessment and certifications, meetings with customers or partners, investors, that includes travel, attending trade shows, which no more than 10% of the total awarded funds can go towards that, and market research and data acquisition. So again, those are kind of what we commonly most see requested in budgets, but as long as it is outside of the 5 ineligible funding uses, anything else is pretty much eligible. Now, if there's something that you are still kind of like, well, this is a weird thing to spend funding on, is this eligible? Feel free to send me an email, and we can work through that. So for the application itself, within the online portal, there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 8 sections total. So the first one is the overview. It gives a kind of general breakdown, quick paragraph or two on the grant, has some helpful tips and reminders for filling out the application, so make sure to read those. And then there's also now an important links section within this first overview section. It is going to have a link to the website with the grant manual. It is going to have a link to the State of New Mexico W-9, and then it is going to have a link to the budget template. So as we'll go into that in just a sec, but through this application process, we are requiring you to upload a W-9 on the front end instead of on the back end if you are awarded. So the next section after that is going to be company information. This is where you start filling out information, general information on the name of the company, the contact email, contact information, and then like, for example, the company address, those sorts of things, pretty straightforward. The next section is on company eligibility. So just asking a couple questions to make sure you're eligible to apply for this funding. The next is the executive summary. This is going to be where the bulk of the writing in your application happens. I believe there are 8 to 10 questions here, focused around things like, what is your problem? What is the solution? The team, the market, what else we got? A business plan, and I believe a couple more. But kind of just, this is where the bulk of the writing actually happens for the application, so make sure to spend most of your time here. There's a little parentheses at the end of each question that tells you the character count for each question. The majority of them have a character count limit of 1,250 characters. That's about 1 page double spaced, except for the business plan, which has 1,750 characters to give you a little bit more room there. After that is the budget summary section. So like I mentioned before, in the important links section, there is now a link to a budget summary template. Make sure you go and check that out and then upload that in the budget summary. It's pretty straightforward as a template, just, what is the line item, a description of use, and then the amount for each line item. For the description of use, it's really up to you how much you want to include. We don't kind of have a requirement or recommended, number of sentences or something, but if it's something pretty straightforward, just a sentence or 2 will be fine. If it's a cost that maybe needs a little bit more in-depth explanation for, how it provides use to the company, feel free to include that. But again, it's not a requirement. Next after that is the pitch deck. So we do require a pitch deck to be uploaded. That is 8 slides and exactly 8 slides. In that section, there are instructions on exactly what we're looking for in each slide. It's going to be fairly similar to the executive summary, but kind of give you a little bit more expression to, list things if you need something outside of those 1,250 characters, or, just include similar information presented differently with pictures or graphs to help you get your point across. And then the next section is a new section that we've added this year called Required Documents. And as I mentioned, there are a couple things you need to upload here. One is going to be a State of New Mexico W-9. So again, in the important links section, there's a link to this W-9. Make sure you don't use the browser version when you're filling it out. If you fill it out on the browser version and then download it, it'll download it without your edits made. So make sure you download it to your desktop first and then open it that way and start filling things in. There's a page on the front page of that W-9, the first page, that has instructions on how to correctly fill it out. So make sure to pay attention to that before you fill it out, just to make sure in the future, if you are awarded, we don't have to go and do any back and forth on edits that are needed. Along with that, at the bottom section of the W-9, there's a section to fill out if you would like to receive payments through direct deposit. If you want to do that, we'd need a voided check for the company or the business to be uploaded as well. So there's a section right under that for you to upload that voided check. And then the last one is a letter of good standing. There are instructions on how to obtain this letter of good standing through the, what's it called? The Taxation and Revenue Portal, TAP, within the grant manual. So again, there's a link to the grant manual in the important links section. Go ahead and click that, look at the grant manual, and find the instructions there for how to request a letter of good standing. It's pretty straightforward. Once you request it, it usually takes about 5 minutes to populate in your portal, and then you can just download it and upload it. All right, and then the last section is just a quick certification section saying, everything you've uploaded is true to your knowledge, and that you understand clawbacks, if anything is not true, etc. For the evaluation, so this is what you are generally going to be evaluated on in your proposal, help give you a little bit of an idea of how to format and answer the questions on what the reviewers are going to be looking for. So the first is kind of just an overall view of the proposal, the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, those sorts of things. Your business plan, there's a question specifically on your business plan and your growth that's expected within the next 3 to 5 years. These are kind of expected to be estimates. We understand most companies do not have, at very early stages, an idea of exactly what that's going to look like, but just do your best. But again, here we're looking kind of specifically for business growth within New Mexico. The funds for this program and this funding are through taxpayer dollars. So we're looking, through deploying them to companies to see that growth in the future, usually in the form of job creation to increase the tax base. The next section is kind of the just general market analysis and technology analysis. So technology and market readiness, what's the competitive landscape look like? How does your technology compare? What's your competitive advantage? Are you strongly suited to fit that market? Things like that. Next is the financial forecast. Again, as part of that business plan question, there'll be, it's kind of asked what kind of financial resources you currently have or will need in order to meet your business plan for those 3 to 5 years. Your proposed use of funds. So they'll be looking at, given your proposal and your requested use of funds, does it make sense that those funds are going to help you reach those goals in the future and provide value to the company? Qualified management team, one of the most important parts. Does the team have the qualifications to move the company forward and towards commercialization in the future? Here we're kind of looking for mostly, like I said, management team. So people who are playing a large role in the company, of maybe like CEO, CTO, founder, those sorts of roles. But if you also have advisors or other personnel who are playing a large part in the company, feel free to include them there as well. Anybody who you think adds value to the application. And then lastly, again, just to emphasize it, we look at the potential to develop the tax base in New Mexico, which essentially means the potential for job creation in the future, specifically, high-paying jobs within the science and technology sectors. So the grant funding, we are doing things a little bit differently this year than we have in the past. With all the funding we have that has been increased this year, there was kind of a need to change up how we do things. So this is what it's going to look like going forward. Again, projects can be awarded between $25,000 and $50,000. But what's different now is that awardees will receive the full funding upfront upon grant agreement execution. So typically in past years, what we've done is a grantee will receive 25% of the funds upfront, and upon meeting milestones, usually quarterly, they'll receive a next 25%, a next 25%, and then the next 25% for the full amount. This year, we are going to be awarding the full amount. So if you've requested $50,000, you'll be receiving $50,000 upfront once the grant agreement is executed. That usually is about, a month or two after award decisions have been made. And to go along with that, grant reporting is going to look a little bit different, and grant funding period as well. So some of you are probably familiar with the fact that the state works on a fiscal year of July to June. And in the past, this has kind of hindered us with getting funding out at later points in the year and not giving grantees as much time as they may like to execute the funding and deploy it. So part of the reason to give the funding up front now is that it frees us up a little bit to not have to, give that last 25% by June 30th. So now what we're going to be doing is, with giving the full amount up front, we will be giving companies a full 12 months after grant agreement execution to deploy and expense all the funds within their company. So again, full amount will be received up front, and you'll have 12 months from that date to deploy all the funds. So in your budgets or your timelines that you're providing, make sure you include it over a 12-month period. A final report will be due within 13 months of the grant agreement execution. So after those initial 12 months to expense all the funds and for all the work to happen for the grant, you'll have an additional 13th month after that to put together the final report and submit that to our office. Similar to before, quarterly milestone and expense reports will still be required. So there's a report A that we have that will be filled out on a quarterly basis with current milestone updates, progress made, and then we require an expense report with all funding, all expenses used using grant funds to be provided to us. Along with those quarterly reports, we are also changing what the tracking system looks like on our end for those expense reports. So going forward, quarterly reports will now require a follow-up submission of 3 to 5 randomly selected receipts from the provided expense reports. So essentially, we are moving to kind of an audit system of expense reports instead of what we've done in previous years, which is requiring a receipt for every single expense. So for, most of our grants, for this one, maybe we get 10 to 15 receipts submitted with every expense report. We're trying to decrease that number to help a little bit on the company side and our side as well with capacity and moving to an audit system. They'll still get the same point across, but it'll only require the submission of 3 to 5 randomly selected receipts. So on your end, you'll still need to keep track of all the receipts, but you will need to put together quite an extensive expense report initially on all the receipts with every expense and only 3 to 5 once we request them. And our office will be responsible for randomly selecting which of those receipts from your expense report that we require you to send in. So timeline. The grant opened on August 12th, which is exactly 1 week ago today, and will be open until September 3rd, which is about 2 weeks from today. So it's open for about a total of 3 weeks. Once the application closes in mid-September, eligible applications will finish being reviewed by our Technology Research Collaborative Board mid to late September. In early October, selected applicants may be required to give a virtual presentation to the TRC. Doesn't always happen, but in some cases we do like an additional kind of presentation for some applicants. Excuse me. And then in mid-October, award decisions will be made. So likely with that new 12-month period after grant agreement execution for the performance of the grant, the performance period, the award period will likely be from mid-October of 2025 to mid-October of 2026, with that final report being due 1 month after that in mid-November. All right, and that's it for the presentation. For a quick overview, again, my email, phone number are listed here. If any questions come up outside of this webinar or after, feel free to send me an email or give me a call, and we can get those questions answered for you. One last thing I want to mention is that as far as the timeline goes, the applications close September 3rd, 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That is a hard stop. If you are working on your application and at 5:01 you try to submit, you won't be able to. Likewise, if there's technical issues that don't let you submit that you run into last second and it goes over that time, you won't be able to submit your application. So make sure you give yourself an ample period of time, at least earlier in the day, in case anything comes up. But better to do it, maybe a day or two in advance, just to make sure there's enough time to resolve any technical issues if those do come up. But yeah, aside from that, we can move on to questions. I'm going to leave it on this screen just in case people want to jot down my email or phone number. And let's see how this works. All right, I don't see anything in the chat yet. So if anybody has questions, feel free to put them there, but let me go ahead and try this unmuting thing. All right, Carrie Ann, you should be able to unmute if you would like.
Can you hear me, Michael?
I can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, so my question is, what's the total amount that is coming out on this award? Like how many what's the total of it like the whole amount that's gonna be awarded for different businesses?
So we don't give that number out to the public. But like
Oh,
I said before, we do have more funding this year than we have in previous years. So we are looking to make a fair bit more awards than we have. So if we're thinking kind of compared to previous years, if we're making more awards this year, it will be kind of like the least competitive. But obviously it's still a competitive process.
all right, thanks.
Mhm. All right, let's do this. All right, Adam, you should be able to unmute now.
All right, thanks, Michael. Did I hear you correctly that if we upload our voided check, that's a separate document? Currently, I have it scanned in with the W-9, so it's the same PDF. Would you guys prefer me to break that out?
Doesn't matter too much. So the voided check, there is a question underneath it for the voided check, but it's an optional question for those who don't want to upload one. Either way, we're going to get the voided check. If you include it in the question before, you can upload multiple documents per file upload. So really up to you, but there is technically a separate question if you want to upload it there.
Okay, and then could I piggyback with one quick one is
Sure.
on the accounting information, since my company is a new company and I'm currently the one bankrolling everything, there isn't a payroll. And so I just put payroll 0 or 1 employee for me. Is that acceptable, or do you think that you guys are looking for something that has a history of payroll?
Are you talking about the questions that ask the number of people on payroll in New Mexico and outside of New Mexico?
Yep.
Yeah, many of the companies we work with don't technically have like companies on payroll for the company. So really what we're looking for there is people who are kind of what you would consider on your team. So if you're going to list someone further in the application within your
Okay.
like management team or on your team, that's what you would include.
Okay.
It can be a little different for advisors, but if they're playing a role in your company, that is going to strengthen your application. We're considering that kind of as, quote unquote payroll, even though they may not be getting paid because it's an early stage company.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Of course. All right, I'm going to move to Nipa now, and then we'll do some of the chat questions, and then we'll go to Ben. So you should be able to unmute now. Are you there, Nipa?
Hi,
There
can you
we
hear
go.
me?
Gotcha.
Sorry, I had to press Control Shift M. I didn't realize that. Okay. I just had a quick question. Of course, $25,000 to $50,000 is very well appreciated, but as you know, it's not a lot for a business. So I was curious. I just wanted a clarification. Did we need to budget it in such a way that we would spend it across 4 quarters, or is it possible that it would be used up in 2 quarters?
If it's kind of up to you. We have the 12-month period of performance for the grant. That is what you can use the funds within. It needs to be spent within that 12 months. So we can kind of move at whatever pace you move at. So if you're deploying funds very quickly and you say, hey, we've deployed half the funds within the first month, can we send you our milestone report now? That'll work just fine. You send in your final report and you complete the program or the grant in 3 months again, we can be flexible with that. So it's really whatever pace you need to move at.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see. So I'm going to move some chat ones now, Ben, and then I'll get to you. Is it a dilutive or non-dilutive funding source? It is non-dilutive. We do not take any stake in the company. The funding is non-dilutive. In fiscal year 2025, I believe we had 50 applicants apply, just over, maybe 52, and we awarded 7. So again, this year we are planning to make more, but I cannot give a definitive answer on that yet. The business must be headquartered in New Mexico. Can the business be incorporated in Delaware and registered as a foreign business and headquartered in New Mexico? Yes, it can. Vast majority of the companies we have funded and work with are incorporated in Delaware, but are headquartered in New Mexico. So again, as long as the company is headquartered in New Mexico with 60% of their quote unquote payroll, or what you consider the team working for the company, located in New Mexico physically, then you're eligible on that front to apply for the grant. And if anybody has like kind of follow-up questions as I'm answering their questions again, feel free to raise your hand and I'll see that, you know, the names are the same and call you out and make sure you can unmute. Apologies for not having that set up in advance. Can we use the award to pay for a contractor that is setting up a meeting with a VC? Yes, that would be eligible. Any any sort of contract work is usually eligible with this grant. But that's maybe, as I mentioned, an example for the budget where you might want to go into a little bit more of a description than just a sentence for that of saying, setting up a meeting with a VC, but instead saying, you know, going a little more depth on how that's going to provide, obviously it's going to provide value to the company, but why it's necessary to work with that contractor to set that up. So maybe just go into a little more detail on that, but it is eligible. Can it be used for branding or rebranding of developed products? Yes, it can. Any sort of marketing or branding, rebranding for a product is eligible. What is defined as early stage company? Is there a limit to the years the company has been opened? No, there is not a limit. A lot of the companies we work with and many that have gotten funded in the past are within the first year of being a company. Some are a couple years. You know, it's a very broad definition of what we consider kind of early stage or startup. It, you know, can be any range from no employees for the company. They've been around for 3 months so far. They've got a technology they're developing. That's it. Or it can be, you know, they've been around 5 years. They've got 5 employees and they're making progress that way. We don't have, you know, there isn't any preference given to companies that have been around longer. It's really just the strength of your application and how the funding will be used to propel your company forward. All right, let me take a quick detour and get Ben here. All right, Ben, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, thanks. Well, you answered one question about the marketing, but then, so we can pay contractors. Do you have a breakdown on what kind of contractors you can pay? Because on one hand, as you said, most companies that are applying don't actually have people on payroll. Most of us are dealing with contractors. So is there like, do you have an okay contractor type list or anything like that?
We do not, no. So preference, technically there is a preference to work with contractors or companies within New Mexico.
Right.
We would like to see the funds used in New Mexico if possible. And for other grants like our SBR matching grant, there is a requirement to use X amount of the funds within New Mexico. For this grant, that is not the case. You know, we understand some companies are pretty specialized and can't get the support they need within New Mexico, or maybe there's just a much cheaper option outside of the state. So it's really up to you as far as picking what contractors to work with. And again, no preference. Well, there is a preference for it to be used on New Mexico companies as far as contracting goes, but that is not a part of like the grading rubric for the grant. If you decide to go outside of the state, it won't hurt your application at all.
Okay.
And then as far as kind of the types of work contractors can do, again, as long as it's outside of, so research and development, when we say that being ineligible for funding, that's really internal to the company, right? If you were to pay yourself to perform, you know, do some research on the technology, that would be ineligible. But like I said, and here, and I can quickly go back to that. Outside testing and validation, outside lab testing and validation is eligible. So if you want to hire a contractor to, you know, kind of test the product or build the product out a little bit for you outside of the company, that's eligible.
Okay.
Does that give you a good overview?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
And again,
you,
if there's anything that you're maybe a little bit on the fence about, just feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call, and we can talk that through more in depth.
Okay. Thank you much.
Yeah. All right. Let's get back to some of the chat questions. Maybe combine this award with the NMSBA technical assistance or university fee for service work funded from other sources in the same 12-month window. No, sorry. Yes, you can. There is no limitations on stacking funding. So within our office, for example, if you applied for the NMSBIR matching grant a couple months ago and are awarded funding through that, you are still eligible to apply for this grant. Our grants don't have any limitations on, you're awarded one grant, so you can't apply for another. And the same goes for resources outside of our office, like the NMSBA program or any other kinds of services. It does not disqualify you from applying for any others or being ineligible for this by having other grant funding going currently. In fact, that's typically something we like to see if there's, momentum behind the company from other programs within the state. Definitely include something like that in your application. Can you clarify the eligibility regarding New Mexico? Is it based on number of employee hours, FTE, payroll? We have some people in New Mexico that are not paid and some out-of-state employees, trying to make sure we qualify. So it's, that might be, Karen, that might be a conversation to have offline if you want to send me an email. But typically the way we do it is it's just based on the number of employees. So for example, if you meeting that 60% criteria, if you've got 6 within the state, 4 outside the state, you would be eligible. If you have 4 in the state and 6 outside the state, then you would be ineligible. But it might be a more in-depth conversation we can have if it's like, we've got 10 full-time employees in the state and 10 half-time employees outside the state, then, technically it's like 2/3 in the state and 1/3 outside the state. We can maybe work with that. So if you want to send me an email, we can get into a little more depth on that. How are these grants treated for tax purposes? Is it taxable income for IRS? As far as tax questions go, I am not a tax professional, so I am not allowed to give any tax advice based on grant funding. What I can say is that all recipients of state funding, including all the grants we offer through the Technology and Innovation Office, will receive a 1099 tax form from the state of New Mexico. I would advise you speak with a tax professional or accounting professional on how to account for that within your business. Is there a preference for submissions from rural areas of New Mexico? Slightly, yes. So we typically, just in the nature of being science and technology, we typically do not see that many applications from rural New Mexico, just because most of it is focused in, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Los Alamos, and maybe a little bit of Las Cruces. So it's technically not worked into the evaluation criteria to give preference to rural companies, but given that we don't receive that many, it's always something beneficial to have on your company to support rural, or in your application. Sorry, to include in your application, because we do like to support companies that are in rural areas of New Mexico. Can we use funds to pay a New Mexico University higher ed capstone project as a contractor, such as draft marketing plan or get design help? It depends, Virgil. So if you are going to hire the person themselves to do work for you on a contract basis outside of the work they do for UNM, then yes. But if you are going to supplement their funds somehow through the funds going through the university to the individual for them to perform that work, then no. So again, if you're contracting the individual outside of the university for the work, yes. Otherwise, it gets a little bit tricky, and we don't like to get into that. So no. But again, that might be a question for if you want to send me an email and give me a little more description of that, we could go into more of a discussion on that. All right, let's see. Will the EDD have funding for AI technology, or is this an option with this grant? So technically, AI is not within the sectors that we work in and of itself, but it depends on the application of the AI technology. So for example, if you are developing an AI that is used for, very commonly now for websites to have an AI helper, that wouldn't be eligible for our funding. But if the AI you're developing has applications in aerospace or biosciences or advanced energy, or advanced computing, potentially quantum cybersecurity, something like that, then yes. So for an example, a company we funded in previous years uses AI to help locate the best place to set up geothermal energy. So in that case, it would be considered, geothermal energy extraction. So in that case, it would be considered, part of our advanced energy sector and be eligible. But AI in and of itself is technically not within our advanced computing sector. Does the grant cover travel expenses to customer meetings or other engagements? Yes, it does. So if we go, I'm actually still on that page. So it does not cover food is the main thing, or alcohol. So if you are traveling, you cannot essentially have a per diem for the grant, but you can use it for most of the big costs like hotel, travel, registration fees for events, potentially if you're setting up a booth. But again, that's kind of something you have to include in your budget and maybe go into a little more depth on, you know, typically those are pretty expensive, so why you need those funds for that. But yes, most travel is expensible through the grant, both for conferences, 10% of their grant funds for trade shows, and then investors, etc. What about marketing consultants or salespeople? Can we use them? Yes, you can. I actually don't know if we've had a company use them for sales specifically. But marketing is very common, yes, and sales would be kind of on the same category. So yes, for that as well. Just not sure if we've seen that before, actually. That's interesting. Are IP attorney fees, prior art resources, provincial patents, a bunch of legal stuff, marketing, testing, sampling considered eligible business development costs under this program? Yes, they are. So IP fees, very common for what we see budgeted in this grant. Very expensive cost that all companies have, even starting at early stages. So that's eligible. And any kind of work that goes along with that, as far as, again, we're kind of talking about contracting, right? So you're contracting a lawyer to do this work for you, so it's eligible. Other areas of focus too, if it's kind of like accounting or tax or something like that, contracting for those to provide services for the company, help you maybe get set up on, I think an example is in a previous year, we had a company use, again, and it's not a large portion of the funding, but some of the funds for getting set up to be eligible for if they're audited, getting a system set in place and getting everything coordinated within their business. Even that would be something that is eligible. Are technical consultants, process engineers that are paid via 1099 eligible, not direct payroll? So yes, well, maybe I need a little more explanation there. So when you're saying 1099 eligible, you're saying they're not kind of internal to the company, but they work with the company and are paid through company bank account. Can you give me a little bit more of a description there? Off the top of my head, the answer is yes, as long as they are not directly working for the company and on payroll, have a part of the company, then yes. But if, for example, it's like your CTO, that's the engineer, and they're technically not on payroll, but they get paid through the company through a 1099, then no. So again, need a little bit more detail on that for eligibility. If you have a PI with one of the New Mexico federal labs, is it possible to use some of the funds for existing IP calculation verification and aerospace for TRL advancement? Maybe need a little more explanation on that one too. Existing. All right, so are you talking about like funds for licensing IP out of the labs that you've done, for example, through maybe like an NMSBA or something? If that's the case, yes. But if I'm misunderstanding that question, then please give me a little bit more detail there. How about SBIR consultants? They help you identify and meet the government personnel and help develop proposals. Yes, that is eligible. Typically, it's not something we'd like to see a large portion of the grant funds go towards, but it's also not typically something that's more than maybe $5,000 or $8,000. So the answer is yes, but within reason. Essentially, the entire use of the funds cannot be put towards applying for another grant. If it's used towards mostly something else, like 42,000 of it's used somewhere else, and then 8,000 is used for those SBIR consulting services to propel the company forward with future funding. Love to see it. Yeah. All right. Do we need to disclose our investor or just the number of investors we have? Just the number of investors. If you would like to include names, that's fine, but we do not by any means need that. It just kind of gives us an idea of if there is, private interest in the company or not, as far as I don't know what you would call it, like in a little bit, momentum for the company, right? So no, if you just want to list the number of investors, that is fine. And that question's not, the most important question. Many of the companies we work with and have funded don't have any investors for this grant. This grant is very much designed for early stage companies that are, again, maybe have been around for a month or 6 or 1 year. Some of our other grants, for example, our Advanced Energy Award, does require that a company does have outside investment in addition. So that can be grant funding, but typically we like to see it more on the private side of angel investment or VC investment. So that's kind of just a decreased question eligibility, or sorry, not eligibility, but a smaller question to still include in the application in regards to the requirements for other grants. Is company ITAR registration an eligible fund use? I'm not super familiar with ITAR. Let me look that up real quick. Yes, I believe that would be fine. Again, maybe just include a little extra explanation in your budget of why the company needs that registration, but that should be fine. Many registrations and certifications are allowable in this. Well, pretty much all of them are allowable with this grant funding. A lot of things we see too, we sometimes see, companies working with the FDA on kind of some of those regulatory processes. That can sometimes be very expensive. That's an eligible funding use, kind of similar to, registrations and certifications, things like that. Okay, let me check the Q&A real quick. Got to do that earlier. But it looks like I've gotten through most of the questions. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. I'll stick around for another, 5 or so minutes just to make sure nothing comes up last minute. But aside from that, that is going to be it for this webinar for today. Again, I'll go one more time back to, let's see, my email and phone number. Feel free to give me a call at any point up until September 3rd for the application, and we can get your questions answered or send me an email. But thanks for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. All right, I'll do one final call for questions in case anybody had some last minute questions that they wanted a smaller audience for. If not, then I'll go ahead and close out the application in about 15 seconds here. So thank you everybody for taking the time to be here today. And again, any questions going forward, please get in contact.